Hey everybody, it's very exciting to be back, and I'm very excited today to talk to you. Although this morning when I woke up I really felt God tell me to scrap the talk I'd prepared and to come up with a new talk, a topic that He has given me. Now this isn't so good because I like being organised, however you have to obey whenever God speaks. So it's quite interesting because Kevin was up talking there and gave us a word about the motorbike, and then whenever Daniel got up to talk I actually realised this all fits perfectly to what God has given me for today. Now you might feel I'm repeating what you've already heard, but this is from God. Daniel's saying he's off home because he thinks that they've already given the sermon, they don't need me to give it again. Now what's really interesting is that when I got here I actually realised and had totally forgotten that this is actually quite an important weekend in Ireland. This event that's happening in Ireland this weekend hasn't happened in almost 40 years, and that is the visitation of the Pope. So now obviously times have changed from 40 years ago, and the Pope coming is a really big thing, and lots of people are heading out to see him. And I have to say, I really do respect the Pope. I respect his teachings and I respect his words. But, of course, with the Pope coming, there's some bittersweet memories that are coming up because there was an awful lot of abuse happened in the Catholic Church, and that's all being brought to the fore. And actually this morning, whenever God gave me this new topic, this didn't come to mind. But actually what I realised is this is actually an area that fits quite well to the series and the talk that I'm talking about today. We have been talking about the Father's table. Father's table where we get up and we sit with God and we are able to dine with Him and enjoy His company. But we have to remember it's not just us at the table. There are other people there. People who are in our family, people who are in our communities, people who are our neighbours, people we meet in various places. And very often the problems we have in life come from people. We get hurt by people, we get disappointed by people, and we get stressed out by people. Now, of course, other people are there to be enjoyed. We can have fellowship and friendship. But with people comes hurt as well. And we have to remember that while we do sit with God at the Father's table, we have to deal with those around us too. And very often that calls us to forgive. So, should I forgive? This is a really tough, a pretty big topic. And every day we can choose to forgive. But it's not an easy choice. It is a very difficult one. But we know it's the right choice. I'm going to ask you another question. I've just asked you, should I forgive? But I want to turn this around a bit and ask you this question. It's a bit of a different question. So should I forgive? Okay. But really, maybe the question we should be asking is, do I appreciate the forgiveness that God has given me? Now, we're going to talk about that a bit later, okay? So just try and remember that as I talk now for the next little while. But we will go into that a bit more at the end, okay? So don't forget to ask that at the end. I have a Bible verse here. I'll paraphrase these verses. So Peter approached Jesus and said, Lord, how often should I forgive somebody who's wronged or sinned against me? 7 times? To which Jesus replied, not 7 times, 70 times 7. That's what Jesus responded. And Jesus told us this parable. And we know the parables give us an example or a bit of a glimpse as to how the kingdom of God is. So there was a king who wanted to settle his accounts. So he brought his servants before him, those who had debts to him, and he wanted these debts repaid. Now, one servant owed millions of dollars. And just to say here, obviously, whenever we look at biblical times, they didn't use dollars, but this translation is just saying dollars. So this servant owed him millions of dollars, and he wanted this money back. His servant said to him, "Master, I can't pay this back. I don't have the money." And he said, "Well, you must sell everything. Your family, your house, whatever you have, you must sell it all and give me my money back." And the man, in a panic, thinking about this prospect, realised even if he did do that, he wouldn't even have enough to pay back the master. And he said, "Master, please be patient with me. I will find the money and I will pay it back, but please be patient with me." He begged him. And the master took pity and told him to go, that he was free of his debt. He didn't need to pay that money back. To which the servant then obviously was extremely shocked and delighted. However, that servant went off and he approached his servant and said, "I want to settle my debts. You owe me maybe a few $1,000s. I want my money back." Very aggressively demanded this money from this servant. And the servant begged this creditor, who had likewise begged his master, and said, "But I need more time. Please be patient with me. I will look for the money. I will find the money. I just need more time." But he didn't have pity. He didn't have compassion. And he sent him to jail. And demanded he would stay in jail until he was able to repay the money. Now, other servants around saw this, realised the servant had been put in jail, and were very upset, realising that he had been let free, but then he put his own servant in jail for the same thing. And they told the king, at which point the king then said to the servant, "I forgive you. I give you the opportunity to go free. You should have mercy for your servants. I have mercy on you, and where was your mercy?" This angered the king, and he sent him off to prison, where he had to stay until he was able to repay the money he initially owed. And Jesus told this story, he told this parable, and he said, "That is what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart." Now I want to go back and pick up on a few of these points. If you remember, Peter had said to Jesus, "How many times should I forgive? 7 times? And I want to ask you, why do you think he came up with this number 7? Why did he not say 10 or 1 or 2? Why do you think this number 7 came to mind? Represents the 7 days of the week, okay. Anything else? Because 7 is a holy number, yes, possibly. Yep, it could be. Now, I was reading up on this. This isn't something that is stated as fact, but in the Old Testament, we read about how God spoke to the Amos people. And he said at that time that they were to forgive twice, and on the third time, if somebody had wronged them, they weren't to forgive again. And this became ingrained in Jewish law. So people did forgive 3 times, but after 3 times, they didn't forgive again. That's how Jews operated when it came to forgiveness. Now, Peter obviously knew that Jesus was a good man. He really preached the message of love. He knew Jesus was God. And so maybe Peter thought, okay, 7 times, that's a good number. Because obviously he was very aware of this number 3. So he was going even over double what was demanded of people in the law. So he probably thought this was a really clever answer. And he probably thought, 7 times, Jesus, look how good I am, look how righteous I am. And Jesus responded, nope, 70 times 7. And that's huge. That's a massive number. And sometimes when we think of God's love, we think, you know what, God will do this for me and he'll do that for me. And God said, no, I won't. I'll do even more. And that's what Jesus was saying to Peter. The forgiveness has to be massive. You have to just freely forgive. So 7 times 70 comes to 490. Now I'm wondering, could you possibly forgive a person and keep forgiving them and remember all the times you'd forgiven them? Counting up to 490 and then at 490 decide that you wouldn't forgive anymore. There's no chance that you'd be able to remember all that. And that's why Jesus said it, because there's no way we could remember that or keep track of that. And maybe you may have a notebook and you'll keep a tally. But think of the number of people in your life that you have to forgive all the time. It's not just one person. We have to forgive all the time. We have to forgive lots of people. So maybe there's 20 people in our lives that we're forgiven on a regular basis, and you're not going to keep a tally of these 20 people and how many times you forgive them. I know, absolutely, I'd lose count after no time. But the whole point of this number, this whole 490, is to try and show how big his love is for us and how he lavishes that upon us. We can't measure that. We can't keep a tally on his love because it's so big and it's overwhelming, and it will overcome the law. It overcomes everything that we think we need to do. And so when Peter said the number 7, he thought he was being very clever, but Jesus corrected him, saying 7 times 70. So we can't count. We can't count this forgiveness. We can't count God's love. We can't put a measure on it. So I want to ask you, is your master good? Do you think he's good? When I think of forgiving other people, I always have to go back to this Bible story and remember it. Because maybe I'm thinking, well, do you know what? They don't deserve my forgiveness. And I have to say to myself, wait a wee second, Adam. Look at this story. The king let his servant go free. That servant who owed him so much money, he let him go free. But then that servant who was owed a minuscule amount sent his servant to jail. He forgot how much the king had given him. He forgot that freedom that he had been given by the king. And I always try to remember this. And I don't want you to think that, you know, we have to be fearful or we need to think, well, if I don't forgive, then the master will be cross with me. It's not about that. Yes, maybe we've been hurt by people. Maybe it's difficult to forgive those people. But we have to think, is my master good? And we know how good he is. We know he is a good, good God. And we know that by looking at the way he has forgiven us. And he's forgiven me for so much. For so much. And when we look at that, it's so much easier to forgive other people. When we look at the people we need to forgive, or that situation or that problem, we can get swamped in that. Whereas we need to look at God and his goodness. And life's like that. When we look at the positive in our lives, life does become more positive. But when we focus on the negative, or we focus on the way the devil's trying to sabotage our lives, we can get really, really caught up in that. But if we focus on God and his love, and we look at the way he's treated us and the good things he wants for us, all those problems do fade. They become much less. They become much easier to deal with. So whenever we look at those problems and we try to deal with them in our own strength, that's where we run into bother. So we need to look to God, and we need to just rest in that. And those problems will become much more easy to deal with. So is your master good? He is. He's a good, good God. I need 2 volunteers now for a slight demonstration. So who are our brave volunteers that are going to come up to the front? Now, you don't have to do very much. You just need to stand here. You don't need to say anything. Thank you. Bobby, come on up. So I'm the king. Bobby, I give you all this money and I now want it back. This is what I've worked out. This is what you owe me. £1 million. So that's what you owe me. Give me that money, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have it. I don't have enough. So Bobby cannot pay this money back. He has asked for time. He has said he will pay it back eventually, and this has caused me to have pity on him. And remember, this is the way Jesus is with us. This is the way God is with us. He has pity and he is moved to compassion. So Bobby, you can go free. This is what you owe me. Nothing. Your debts have been cleared. You are totally free. Now, come closer, Bobby. Ken, do you want to head over? Kenneth, you owe me this. Here you go. You owe me this. There you go. That's it. So, Kenneth now owes Bobby £10. Tiny amount compared to the £1 million that Bobby was let off scot-free with. But Bobby wants his money back. He's demanding that £10. There's nothing there, Kenneth. Don't try and fool us, eh? It's big money, it's big money. So, Kenneth can't afford this £10, and what does Bobby do? Bobby decides Ken's going to jail until he can pay back this money, and then he can go free. So, show everybody where you are now. So off he goes to prison until he's able to pay back that money to Bobby. Now let's think about this. I let Bobby off with £1 million, but then I've heard now that he has done all of this over £10. How do you think I feel? I'm pretty aggrieved, to be honest with you. I'm insulted. Obviously, this shows you how much regard he had for my kindness and my pity. Yeah, you can see where I'm coming from. Everybody's laughing here. Why? Oh, just Ken. Yep. So, if he really understood the greatness of what I had given him and that freedom, he would have let Kenneth go free. He wouldn't even have thought twice about it. But the fact that he didn't just goes to show how little he appreciated it. Which meant that in the end, I decided to reinstate that debt because of how insulting it was, and because I realised he didn't appreciate it or he didn't value that freedom. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I have to say that story is brilliant, and there have been times in my life where I think, should I really forgive this person? And I have to remember that story, and I have to remember the message that why am I struggling to forgive? Why am I doing that whenever God's forgiveness has been so great towards me and so kind towards me? And we read the Lord's Prayer. It says, forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us. It doesn't just say forgive us. That's not an option. The two are linked. The two are interconnected. So while God has forgiven us, we must forgive others. And this verse says to be kind to one another, tender-hearted towards each other, because God, through Christ, has forgiven us. And that's a really lovely verse to remember. A really lovely verse to remember. And it calls us to forgive. We must forgive others because we have been forgiven first. It's not like we're doing this in our own strength where we just have to forgive others. We have been forgiven first. We have experienced that freedom and that forgiveness, and we must do the same for others. Without God's forgiveness, it would be a very, very difficult journey to forgive other people. But because He has given us that, because He has let us experience His forgiveness and His peace, we can do that first. There's a story about this man, and I read it, and it's from 1911. And it's a man called Timothy Ostrovich. Now, this is somebody I'd never heard of until I read this. But it's a very interesting story. Because when he was 20, he lived in Russia. And he was a young man, he was 20, and he had been able to build up some money in the bank, which meant he was now in a position to get married. Because in the past, this is the way it was handled. You had to have plenty of money, and if you had plenty of money, it meant that you were allowed and able to marry. Now, his uncle came along, stole his money, and fled to a different place. And Timothy was in a panic because that was his money gone. That was really now going to show how his life was going to be so much more difficult. And he was so cross with his uncle. His uncle, who was family, who should have cared for him, who should have loved him, had done this to him. And he was so angry. The uncle headed off, spent his money, got married, had a great life. And this young man wasn't able to do that. Now, 17, 18 years later on, he met God. He started a relationship with God, and he started to pray, he started to read the Bible. One day he read the Bible, and it was talking about the Pharisees not welcoming Jesus into their house. And he read that, and that really had a massive impact on him. And he said, Lord, you are welcome in my house. And at the same time, this brought to mind his uncle. And he thought, it's time I forgave my uncle for essentially ruining his life. His uncle, who should have cared for him and loved him and helped him on his way, did the opposite. Now, a while later, it was Christmas Eve. And he was a great man, so he decided he would invite those people who were less fortunate to his house for a Christmas meal. So he invited people who were extremely poor, very, very disadvantaged, not fortunate whatsoever, into his house for this banquet, this meal. So he was having a meal, and the door was open. It was a just enter at your own will policy. People never knocked. They just walked in and out as freely as anything. But he heard the door knock, and people were a bit worried because they knew this wasn't the norm for his house. So he went over and he answered the door, and it was a really old man hobbling along on two sticks, wearing really old clothes, obviously very, very poor, came in. And he said, who is this? And Timothy recognised it was his uncle. His uncle came in. And because the uncle just felt that he could go into the house. And he thought of the Bible verse that talked about if your enemies are hungry or thirsty, you give them food, you give them drink. And so he welcomed his uncle into his house, and he gave him food, and he gave him the same hospitality he gave everybody else. And that's forgiveness. That shows real, true forgiveness, that action. And he then said to his uncle, you can stay here until you die. You will be here and your final breaths will be blessed. And that's an amazing story. Despite everything, this man understood God's love and God's forgiveness, and so made this decision to forgive his uncle. Even though what his uncle had done was dreadful, he knew that it wasn't compared to what he had done to God and how he had hurt God. So knowing that, let him forgive the uncle. I have a number of different quotes from the internet. They're not from the Bible, just quotes that we have found that are all about forgiveness, and I think it's nice maybe if we have a wee look at these. So to forgive means that you find freedom. You forgive that person and realise that it's not them that walks free, but you that walks free. I think this is an interesting one. I want to talk about it. You know, obviously people pay rent. So if I have somebody living with me in my house, then they'll pay me rent. Or maybe if I want to rent a house, I'll pay rent for that until then I move home, and then I'll not have to pay rent anymore. So maybe sometimes you'll say to somebody, come, you can stay in my house and you don't need to pay me anything. But whenever you do that, they take up space, and all of a sudden your space becomes much smaller because they've taken up that bit of space. And you know, if you don't forgive somebody, you refuse to forgive them, they are stuck there in your mind all the time. And it gets to the point where they almost take over your thoughts. And it's not like it's fair, because it's not like they're paying rent, or it's not like they're doing their part of the deal. They're just there all the time. And that's wasting head space, that's wasting emotional space, all of that. So try to think of it like that. That if you don't forgive, it means that person almost hijacks your life. You need to forgive, and you need to give yourself freedom, because without doing that, you won't find freedom. And maybe you've been hurt. Maybe you've been disappointed by other people. But when we forgive, unfortunately, it doesn't change the past. It doesn't change that hurt. And maybe we'll never forget what's happened. We'll always remember it. But when we forgive, what we're doing is we're freeing ourselves up for a better future, a much better future. And it's true. Forgiveness is absolutely incredible. It's a beautiful sign of love. And when we do forgive, all of a sudden we have a peace that we can't explain. A peace and a happiness where we're able just to let go of things and let go of the past. And another quote says, anger, it makes you smaller. However, when we forgive, we grow. We grow, and we will become more of what we thought we could become. So I'm not sure how many quotes, sorry, I've lost count. I think this is the last one. When we forgive, we're giving ourselves freedom to move on with life, and freedom to not be bound down by this hurt and these other people. And this definitely is the last one, sorry. I know that for a fact. When we hold a grudge, it doesn't make us a stronger person. Not in the slightest. You know, sometimes you meet somebody and somebody's saying, oh, no, I don't think that, or I'm a much stronger person because I'm able to hold this grudge against a person. But it's not that. Being right doesn't mean you're strong, or trying to enforce the fact that you're right. It makes you bitter. It makes you bitter, it makes you annoyed, it makes you cross. But when we forgive, it doesn't mean that we're weak, it means that we're free. So back to the question, Should we forgive? Should I forgive? And what was the other question that I asked you to try and remember at the beginning? Can you remember? Yeah. Do we really appreciate God's forgiveness? And again, I want to show you this example. So before, this was a debt that was owed. Before, this is what we owe God. And God has let us go free of the debts. God has let us go free and walk free. And remember that number as well, 490. Just a symbol of how much God is prepared to forgive us and how much He does forgive us. So we have to forgive others whenever we try and think, I'm going debt free here and I really shouldn't be. And we shouldn't actually think that what people do to us is bigger than what we've done to God, because it isn't. So 7 times 70. Do you think Jesus was saying that was an exact number? Or do you think maybe Jesus thought, well, I wonder if 70 times 60 or what's the best number? I think probably Jesus was trying to come up with a number to teach us that His love is so big. Now, I don't know why Jesus picked those numbers. I don't have the right answer. I have no idea. When we go to heaven, we can ask, why did you say 70 times 70? And maybe it's just something that came to His mind on the spot, or maybe He does have a very significant reason for those numbers. But what I want to tell you today is that 490, the whole point of that number is to realise how big it is and how we're called to forgive more than we can possibly count. And maybe if we did start to count, come 489, it would be the end of our lives, who knows? But it's a massive number. And we think about forgiveness, we have to realise and remember that it can be hard. And I want to give all of you a bit of time just to rest and pray. And maybe you don't feel there's anybody you need to forgive, but ask God and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal anything that He wants about maybe this area of forgiveness in your life. Because maybe as you pray, something will come into your mind that you hadn't thought about. I want to tell you a story that happened to me. It was about 2 years ago. I went to a conference, had an interpreter there. I was the only deaf person. Really excited to go to this specific conference. And when I got there, I was shocked. Because I said, I've got my interpreter here, and I had actually helped a lot. I had arranged the funds to cover this interpreter, which really they should have done. But I did all that and I got the interpreter booked, because I knew with the conference that they maybe didn't have a lot of money in that. So, but when I got there, I was with a certain table, but they wanted me to sit in the back corner because they didn't want the interpreter to be visible. They wanted the interpreter to be away offside. So I couldn't sit where they told me to because it was too dark. So I moved up to sit where my table where the people I was with were. And I tried to explain to the organiser that I had to sit there and the interpreter had to be up the front. And they were saying, no, this is a very famous speaker and we don't want the interpreter because we don't want this interpreter taken away from their talk. And then they were saying, you don't mind putting the interpreter behind you and that? And I was saying, no, you can't, because I can't see the interpreter. And I thought, do I fight here or do I back off a bit? And then they were saying, look, we don't want this interpreter distracting. So everything I needed about my access was becoming a real bit of negativity. They weren't encouraging me. They weren't welcoming whatsoever. And this was really annoying me. I was starting to get quite angry. Really angry. And the conference was starting. Nothing had been sorted out. The interpreter didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. So they went and sat up the front. And in a panic, everything seemed okay. But you know what? This made me feel really quite sick. And I thought there's no point thinking about this or going over and over this in my head. I just decided at that point that what had happened, to put it aside. Maybe they had a bad morning. Maybe they had something happen with their family. Maybe they missed breakfast or that. And I thought, I'm not going to let this negativity ruin the day. So I got on with it as normal. And it was hard because it was quite awkward, it was quite tense. And the speaker kept coming up and using the interpreter as a prop, like holding their shoulders and that. And the interpreter was very uncomfortable. And I just thought, this just isn't right. It's not appropriate. It's not accessible. And it was extremely annoying. And I was getting quite cross. After the conference, I sent through an email to say that it was not an appropriate way to treat deaf people and all of that. And they replied saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Can we offer you one of his books?" And I felt like saying, I do not want anything more to do with you in my life. I really did want to say that, but I thought, no, don't. It's not worth going back, wasting my energy or holding a grudge. I just decided at that point to let go, because thinking what God had forgiven me for was so much more than what they had done to me. So I not only prayed forgiveness, but I prayed that his work would be blessed. And that was a tough decision, but I made it out of the knowledge that God is good, and God has been so good to me. Now, every so often this would come to mind again, and I would get cross again, but when that happened, I said, I've decided to forgive, and I've let go. Now, it's not about forgiving again and again and again. You forgive once, but sometimes you need to remind your thoughts, I have forgiven, I've done that, and I need to stand in that forgiveness. And now, thankfully, I've totally forgotten about that. Those emotions aren't still there. And that all comes from a place of freedom, knowing how God has freed me and loved me and forgiven me. So that's what you have to look to whenever you need to forgive. We need to look to God's love.